Warm welcome to everybody, all the audience members, and especially the two key speakers for this evening. I am Sanjay Anand Ram. I will be the moderator, facilitator for this conversation. We'll keep this very conversational, we'll keep this informal, we will keep this as a true samvad and hopefully some vad and vivad as well. A brief introduction of Krishna, and then I'll introduce Raghu. Krishna is the founder, CEO of Satwa, a leading social impact consulting and advisory firm that uses a mix of research, technology, and data to service the needs of corporations, foundations, academia, government, and others as it relates to social impact projects. They're a little over 10 years old and have built some very fabulous products and services, and been very proud to have been associated with them over this journey of theirs. Then there is Raghu, who I find it very hard to pigeonhole him, but let's say he's a highly evolved, erudite, knowledgeable, and again, an impactful person, having gone through a lot of realizations and learnings and experiences. He's the founder of, co-founder of Quinergy, founder of Tao and Ritambara, a bunch of other initiatives that focus on using traditional Indian wisdom, Indian knowledge, Indian heritage-based insights into coaching, developing human capital, and making people far more productive, far more fulfilled and realized in their day-to-day work. And I think the one line that captures what he does is he enables people to become the best that they can be. And that is in a sort of brief nutshell, Raghu. So warm welcome once again to you gentlemen, Krishna and Raghu. So what I'll do is I will start off this conversation with a few questions that will set the ball rolling. And over time, as we make progress, we will address some of the questions that audience members have sent in. And we will have a robust discussion around those. So, we've got this samvad of this evening, build to last or build to flip. It'd be interesting to understand from each of you, what do you understand by build to last versus build to flip? What are the pros and cons, if any of these? And is any one path better or worse than the other? We'll start with Krishna.
Thanks, Sanjay, and thanks everyone, for being here and keeping it conversational. I think is the most effective way for at least somebody like me to share things that have been very core to the way we've worked, and I hope I can learn along the way as well. So from my personal journey and from a Satwa point of view, when I look at the discussion around build to last and build to flip, more looked at it as what do I want to do and what is the right approach for that, than whether one is better than the other or not. So taking a larger in my mind, what was a little bit of a longer term vision of let's say impacting poverty globally, or reducing it in whatever way we can. We realized it was a very kind of a long journey, and it was in our minds more a marathon than something that we would probably achieve in 3-5 years. So we had to kind of prepare for that journey, which probably would have been something that you probably look at building to last, rather than look at something where you're probably looking at a more micro trend or certain changes in the ecosystem or the market that you potentially can take advantage or service in the short term. But since we were looking at something that was very large from a vision point of view, the way we started to prepare for that, and the time we took to understand the problem, the time we gave ourselves to build something that we believed was a more robust organization approach, and finding the right tools to solve that problem, to discover ourselves. All of these were were possible because I think we went with the approach of that we are here for a much longer term, solving a problem that will probably take us, few tens of years to get to. And I think that mentality of saying we are building something, to last, and not just that we want to achieve this, but building an institution that could potentially keep the balance, in society, which is kind of why we put the name Sattva, between impact and profit. If those were the three things, or business and society, or whichever way we kind of look at it, I think that core fundamental is why we decided to take a lot of decisions. But we're not sure whether it's kind of good or bad. But if we had taken an approach of saying, hey, let's just only build a consulting organization in the impact space, we would have probably taken a very different route than saying, hey, we want to impact poverty in the long run. Or if we said we'll only build technology that would, let's say, do this, then we would have taken a different route. And tomorrow, if the market trend changed, we would have flipped to solving some other problem. But since we started solving this for what we believed was a larger problem, thinking about it in that way and trying to get the fundamentals right, and a big part of that was discovering ourselves, and that's why the first 3-5 years of Sattva was a lot more of self-discovery of what we wanted to do, how we wanted to do it, why impact on the ground mattered more than building PPTs. All of those things were key decisions, keeping that long term in mind. Otherwise, I think there was enough good opportunity first to build some PPTs for India, and then some PPTs for Africa, and then some technology for something else. So for me, it's probably the problem that you want to solve and why you want to solve that problem that might help. And there may be problems that you might want to solve where flipping may be the best way to go about it. At least, but for us, given what we wanted to do, we thought that taking our time, discovering ourselves, building those fundamental principles and those pillars was more useful. And I think we didn't see the fruits of that for the first 5 years, but the last 3 to 4 years, I think we've now seen the fruits of that, those initial days of self-discovery, which probably, I think has been a bit of a boon.
So Krishna, I mean, you talked about this having a problem that is really large and meaningful to be able to solve, creating an institution, and then a process of self-discovery, self-awareness, right?
Yeah.
We'll get to that in due course. And then, the flip side of the build to last was the build to flip. What are your thoughts on building to flip?
So I think, if...
Would you ascribe, let's say, a value to it in the sense that is it a good thing or a bad thing?
I think it's
right thing or a wrong thing?
I think it's the right thing and the good thing for sure, Sanjay, depending on what is that we wanted to do. For example, if, I had to build a company that would take advantage of a certain technological innovation, or if my primary purpose of an entrepreneur was financial freedom, let's say, then build to flip would be, definitely a good way to go about it. So I think I think it's definitely a good thing depending on what you would like to do. I wouldn't say it's necessarily a bad thing. The only question is that for you? And is that who you are? I think is the more important thing. And as we went through that journey of self-discovery, we realized we were really here to build something.
You guys know. So the purpose is defined by the self-discovery and awareness. And Absolutely. Then the purpose is manifested in the kind of entity that you build. Absolutely. Is that a fair way to characterize it?
I would definitely say so. So
over to to Raghu to put all of this and give meaning to this.
Okay.
So build to last versus build to flip, Raghu.
Yeah.
What's the difference?
I look at this slightly differently from what Krishna is looking at it. Yeah. My experience is this, Krishna and Sanjay. Whether it's an individual or it's an organization, I think it's the same, because an organization ultimately reflects the mind of the collective mind of at least the key set of whom I call the institutional builders of the organization, right? These are the people who form the core, who form the spine of the organization and impact almost everything that happens in the organization, right? Now, both in my consulting and in my coaching, I've seen that whether it's an individual or it's an organization, when they have a larger purpose, which is not a self-centered purpose, the person or the group is able to deal with difficult situations and bring in a certain commitment to heroism, which is absent when the purpose is very narrow. What seems to happen when the purpose is narrow is the person or the organization becomes very reactive, and the tendency to become anxious that my thing is not going to happen is very high. So let's say if you have a core set of people whose investment in the organization is very tightly linked to consequences. Built to flip means I'm waiting for an opportunity to flip it. I'm here, I want to make some money and I want to get out. Which means that my eyes are focused not on what value I'm building, what kind of an investment I'm making, but how I'm positioning the organization, how I present the organization, and so on, right? Yeah. And what I find is when you have your attention here, right, whenever there's a big challenge, right, there is no inner resilience to fight it. Yeah, this is what I found over and over again.
Absolutely.
Right. What you're saying is that when you're focused on the short term, correct, the here and now, yeah, the organizational elasticity is lost.
Yeah, personal resilience is lost and organizational elasticity is lost.
And yeah, therefore building a lasting institution goes by the wayside.
Yeah.
Okay. And so, so one of the things, therefore, Raghu, if one is looking at building this institution, and you've been intimately involved with the journeys of what are now India's marquee institutions, whether it is TCS or whether it is Infosys or whether it is TVS or whoever else, these are institutions that people respect, regard, and have a particular way and schema of things. How would you define, let's say, the importance of purpose? If you're looking at smaller companies, which are not the large companies whose names I took, how do you tell the CEO and the management team, guys, you need to have a purpose. You need to be able to look inside of you and figure out what is it you want to do. And therefore, is it for everybody or is it only for some kinds of people?
See, my experience here is like this, Sanjay. Most of these organizations, when I started working with them, were smaller organizations.
Yeah, okay.
When I first stepped into TCS, it was not as big as this. It was in 1999 and things like that, right? It was relatively smaller. And most of the founders or the people, the initial set of people were still there running the organization.
Okay.
What I found most inspiring in all of them, right from Mr. Kohli down to Ramadurai, everybody was, they were fired up with the idea of proving that India can do something.
So the sense of mission, right? That India can build world-class software.
Tremendous sense of mission, which gave them an ability to take on challenges, which in a very business kind of context may not have been wise to take up. But if they had to make a mark, they had to take up these challenges.
Right.
I think the same goes for the initial set of people in Infosys. Right. When I initially worked with them, they were still very small. They hadn't even gone to to their first IPO. Right. The amount of the kind of conviction in what they were doing was extremely high. Right. I worked with the Hondas when they were very young and when they were starting their IV fluid business. The commitment to give a product which is of excellent quality was so clear and patent. Right. It drove everything that they did.
So a sense of mission, number one.
Yeah.
Which is larger than each of their individuals' personal goals.
Yeah.
Number two, a insane or a radical commitment to quality, to high quality, to delivery, to servicing the need, and an insane focus on having impact over the long term. Would that
Correct.
kind of characterize this kind of attitude?
Yeah, yeah. And I've also seen when this is lost, a lot of things start shaking up.
Right, right.
I've seen
Now,
both sides.
and you made an interesting point, Raghu. You talked about, the founding team was very fired up with the sense of mission, right?
Yeah.
And therefore, it translates into an organizational culture that the founding team creates and establishes, which
Yeah.
in turn perpetuates the sense of mission across the organization.
Yeah.
How would you see now? There are a lot of very catchy slogans, right? People are our greatest asset. We are a people first organization. How does one
Yeah.
translate these into the organization's behavior and actual way of working? First Raghu, then Krishna.
Okay. See, I find these set of statements not very easy to understand, Sanjay, because if you go back to Peter Drucker,
Yeah,
okay, who considered the father of management, he not only talks at length about what it means to create an organization, and his commitment is clearly built to last. The second thing he talks about in, I think, his first book or whatever, this big book called Management, is how the only creative element in the organization is a human being. Everything else is not creative in of itself. You have money, you have machines, you might have infrastructure, you might have rules and regulations to run the company. All of this has to be interpreted by people, and the energy and the life comes only from people. Right? The same thing is reflected in several Japanese management originals. Right? Maeda Masana talks about it, and he was one of the people who was supposed to set up the whole Japanese industrial system. So to me, the lifeblood is in human beings. And if the human beings who are coming into the organization don't value the organization, and if they're not willing to bring their best into the organization, where will creativity come from? Where will commitment to fight through difficult situations come from? This energy does not come from money. This energy does not come from putting rules.
money is a derivative.
Yeah, derivative. You cannot incentivize a person to fight a great war.
Right, right, right.
Right? And this we have seen over and over again. Vietnam had spirit, the US didn't, Vietnam won. In everything, you see this right across history.
Yeah, Krishna?
So,
and it would be useful if you can give us a sense of what and how you attempted to do this at Sattva.
Absolutely, sir. And just want to kind of, for a minute, touch upon the purpose, point as well, because that's kind of linked to, this thing about, culture and people. For us, I think and we, to Raghu's point of that, having that mission or that drive, looking at almost right in the beginning, we said being irrationally committed to, creating that impact, right? It's something that logically didn't make sense to most people, and we have primarily advised very early on also that, not to kind of do things like this, which is go on the ground, consult to non-profits, take really less money to do some of these work that we did. But it kind of gave us that, again, that journey of self-discovery. But for us, the purpose journey has also been about, I think everybody has a purpose in some form or the other. I mean, probably the guy stealing also has a purpose, attached to it. But the question was, whose purpose, was it? And my learning has been, there's that individual purpose or a few individuals' purpose. Then there's a purpose of, you and a community. But if your purpose starts to, engulf more and more people, which is the larger world, then our learning has been that everybody then wants you to win. And the amount of support, partnership, everything that has come, to our way has been absolutely amazing, because we were looking at everybody's, benefit, the whole world's benefit when we're saying we need equality and better society and better environment and everything else. And that kind of led back to, having the discussion about shared vision, because now, when at Sattva we are about 150, 60 people, it's not like my mission or my vision, that everybody would want to kind of go out and solve, but it's everybody's world. It's not only Krishna's world that's going to become poverty free, it's everybody's world. And hence that ownership of the vision, because the purpose was defined to be much larger, and it was benefiting everybody, and everybody was able to connect to that vision. We were able to get to a stage, I believe, where the vision was a lot better shared. And I recently read in an article that shared visions can't be announced. It has to be actually shared. You can't go and say this is our shared vision. So, which means people actually come together to say, yes, I'm part of the vision. And we've always said that, hey, you're solving your own world's problems, and you're contributing to things that you're passionate about, which then, to Raghu's point, made people, in their own sense, the hero of their story, of creating that impact. And not contributing to somebody else's journey or war or whatever. And that's probably the Vietnam example. They were fighting for their dignity in some sense. So I think for us but purpose is what has led to that culture of people being more involved. And I think that's something we've tried to kind of emulate even in our approach, trying to take, for example, not creating rules and policies, but more guidelines, helping people discover their approach. A real recent example is one of our colleagues was very passionate about maternal health, and while she was in a certain role in the organization, this passion drove her to do some stuff, and we said, okay, we give you more time to drive that aspiration of yours. And today she's really gone deeper in that, so much so for the business. We probably in the last 20 days one of our biggest deals in maternal health from a very, very large corporate foundations, because we let one of our employees, our team members actually follow the purpose that they had, which also aligned with the larger vision of the organization. So it benefits tremendously, if that kind of shared vision and empowerment is there, and it has to kind of reflect in our walk the talk kind of an approach as well. We can't just say it, but when it comes to actual business, we say, yeah, but we come back to it later. We'll have to walk the talk. And I think we've also created an environment where when we have not walked the talk, we've been called out in our all hands saying, hey, you say this, but you haven't done this. And we've immediately gone back and said, oh, I'm sorry, but let's see how we can fix that. So I think that approach of being open and connecting everybody back to the larger mission and saying this is part of the togetherness that we take, and it's tremendously helped us in the last, I would say, 3 months of this really, really difficult time that we're all going through. Because of this.
Thanks, Krishna. I mean, that was helpful. One last sort of pointer question from me, and then we'll open it up to the audience who've already sent in a bunch of questions. While all of this is nice, in the sense that we'll have open communication, everybody has a sense of mission that is larger than themselves, so that everybody works together to the larger cause of the company. Each one is a hero of their own story. All of it is great. How does it translate to actual action within a company? For example, typically organizations are set up as hierarchical groups. Communication is top down. When the times are bad, you want to cut back on costs, there are layoffs. People are asked to go home. That's the reality of how things, or how most organizations are structured, or how they work or react to external environment, right? So given that, what would you say are the top 3-4, let's say, attributes or prerequisites to communication, to organization, or organizing oneself and the team, the culture that has to get created? You talked about being open and so on, and receptive to feedback. So like that, what are the top 5, let's say, attributes you would imagine a company that wants to do something really meaningful needs to have?
Sure. So I can go first, and
yes, and then Raghu subsequently.
So I think absolutely. I think to make any business work or any institution work, for the hierarchy is critical of, and the question is, what is the hierarchy doing, and how, so if it's a hierarchy of accountabilities, then I think it makes sense, and I think there the role of the manager or the leader, is really about facilitation, co-creation, collaboration, rather than a very in some sense an army style of functioning, and I think that's probably detrimental if you have the will to last kind of an approach or the vision from that perspective. So which means the actual role of the leaders becomes more about facilitation, co-creation, obviously challenging and driving accountability. But the hierarchy has to kind of, in some sense, be that. So in one angle, you're all flat because everybody's empowered to speak up and ask the question. But when you look at it from the hierarchy of accountability, there are different people who come up with different, levels of responsibilities and accountabilities. That is the first thing. The second is, I think, and this has been the very difficult thing to deliver or work on, is to drive that empathy, in the culture. How do you define? I mean, in that, it was very interesting. We were having this discussion internally, and when we said on that tough night when the proposal deadline is there or a deliverable deadline is there and everybody's running behind it, how do you kind of demonstrate empathy? And one of the managers said, no, that evening I only have 50% empathy. Don't expect more, from me on that day because there is crisis, And we said, no, it's not possible, right? You have to kind of and the team said that's the day we remember actually on how you kind of acted. So driving that culture of empathy, especially among leadership and people who others
emulate. So give us some quick examples of what would you do to make it happen.
So I think it's really about for us, it definitely about walking the talk. It's role modeling is very, very critical, but at the same time making sure that we build that capacity, and I think creating that approach of learning and developing people, because we also hire from very high diversity of places. We have people from IITs, IIMs, coming from international schools all over the place, and they all have very different ideas about what people management is and empathy is in different industries. So really investing in both defining your own way of work. In our case, we've created that SATPA way of work, and then putting it in actual practice through L&D and policy and management, and constantly problem solving. You also need to create some culture champions in the organization, people who can diffuse the situation right then and there, and who you actually then, in some sense, identify and develop and nurture, because these are people who really make sure that things kind of don't, in some sense, blow up. So I think that for us has been a very, very critical thing. And across the years, I think we've really benefited from few people who've been holding this as the most important thing in the organization. And I think they've contributed tremendously to the growth of the organization, primarily because they've, kind of walked this, and other people have hence emulated that, as we
got it. Okay. Raghu, please, about this whole idea.
You've asked a very big question, Sanjay. So it's a huge thing. And I'm very thrilled to listen. I'm quite, getting zapped listening to Krishna and this thing. I'm just reminded of 2-3 things when talking to Krishna very quickly. I've worked in fairly large projects like Tamil Nadu water system and things like that, right? Which is in the government and fundamentally hierarchical. Yeah. Now, when we set out to do it, my friends Suresh and Pradeep Prabhu and myself, we designed the whole program based very much on some of the things that Krishna is talking about. It's an old Indian system called the Kudam. So you bring people together and you say that the dharma of what we are going to do is more important than anything else. So can you keep aside your hierarchy and look at what is the dharmic thing to do? Now, a whole set of PWD engineers who were there, almost 70, 80 people we worked with first, came out at the end of the program and said, we are not PWD engineers, we are social engineers. So this is very critical.
They're not PWD engineers, but social engineers.
Social engineers.
So they saw their role very differently.
Yeah. They're looking at themselves, their identity is changed. And they're saying our job is to ensure that water is there for the next 3 generations. And we've got a film on this. You can go and look it up in barefootacademy.org. Now, it was tremendous. The moment the shift came, everything shifted. And I'm hearing Krishna talk about that. I don't see myself anymore as an employee. I don't see myself anymore as, doing this job or doing that job. My identity itself shifts. And you'll see this in all these great organizations. I've actually met people who have worked for the Tatas, And I was sitting in front of this gentleman after about, actually 10 years after he left Tata's and went to another organization. He kept saying, we have done this, we have done this. After a while, I figured that he was not talking about the organization that we were sitting in, right?
He was talking about his
He was
earlier
talking
job.
about Tata Steel. Right now, this kind of an identification and this kind of a sense of what it means to be a human being in a certain context is a very critical thing. The second critical thing is to have a coherence of meaning. See, when difficult situations come, if there isn't a coherence of meaning in people's minds, these one or two critical actions and one or two critical instructions or directions will not create a synergistic response. So it cannot be done suddenly. You have to continuously invest so that everybody has a similar meaning and a larger coherent idea of why we are here. Then a small instructions, whatever, will bring in tremendous synergy.
Right.
This is the second thing.
So common meaning, right? Common meaning and
shared meaning first,
shared
which will
meaning,
lead to everything else.
Yeah.
Right. So if Krishna comes up and says that, tomorrow we have something, this is what we have to deliver, right? He cannot suddenly build in this coherence of meaning. 10 people from different places cannot put in their energy and know exactly what to do. That's happened over a long period of time.
Right.
Right. And the other critical thing is how responsive the leaders are and how sensitive they are to balancing task and the feeling level thing. This is a continuous balance. Long-term, short-term is a continuous balance. Task and human being is a continuous balance. Now, showing the ability to balance this, I think, is key. Right? If you get into a dogmatic thing about it, I don't think you'll build in flexibility or power in the organization.
Right.
You cannot be dogmatic about it.
Correct.
Right? And these kinds of abilities to be sensitive about these dharma sankatas at one level is a personal thing. I have to bring in personal energy in each context. Stand up for why I'm making this decision, and people have to understand that. If these things are not built in continuously, a crisis will show up the cracks. Right? Whereas if you build it, then the crisis will show up the coherence.
Right. And that's critical because it's like that bricklayer, right? Who says, my job is just to lay a brick.
Correct.
He has no conception of this massive, grand structure that is visualized by the architect and others. Because he's just treated like a cog in the wheel. He's not part of the entire thinking, planning, designing, all of those, right? And it's, I suppose, a natural fallout of the way we tend to analyze jobs, break it up into an assembly line, factory-like situation where each person does just one tiny component without getting a sense of what the larger whole actually is.
Correct.
And where it all fits in.
Correct.
Right. And
I think that comes from the leadership, Sanjay.
Yes.
If the leaders from the beginning are thinking, I'm just doing this to, satisfy the customer today and not building an institutional framework right from the beginning, you cannot suddenly create. And that's the difference, I think, between building to last and building to flip. When you build to flip, you don't necessarily have an institutional perspective.
Right.
You build to last, you must, every person who's in the leadership team must have this larger context. And in every little thing, it'll show through. It's not in this big talk like what Krishna said.
So it is not a task-oriented mindset. Right. It is a synthesis. It is not a minute analysis.
Correct. Every brick that is laid, every brick that is laid from the beginning, you know that you're building some larger structure.
Correct. So the goal, the vision, the articulation, all of that is critical, right? Like the old saying, right? I have yet to see a bottle where the bottleneck is not at the top.
Correct.
So the leadership is very important.
Correct.
And so that is a nice segue for us to get into some of the questions that the audience has sent in. And typically, for example, one question that came in is, how does one balance well-being and innovation, right? During crisis times, how does one manage that? How does one create this balance, especially when you're working remotely, and if there's all kinds of pressures on one? How does one balance well-being? How does one deal with innovation?
So I think at least the way Sanjay we've gone about it is that I mean it's about deciding what comes first, right? And what is more fundamental. And I think we put well-being at the more fundamental stuff, right? Without well-being, there's no innovation. So we had to get that right, without
So how did you do
getting
that?
that absolutely right, it was hard to kind of do anything else, on top of it. But once that is kind of taken care of, and again, different people go with at different levels. There's an organizational mean, but there are people at different levels to taking that time to feel better. And then it's almost like as people feel better, they start to become more productive, more innovative. They come back to where they were, and probably even more. And in these times, I think that ability to pivot, and again, the opportunity that you create, the structures that you create. So, for example, in this COVID-19, when the COVID-19 struck, we divided ourselves into two task groups. One task was to really go, we had relatively less cash, and and business, some part of the business was getting wiped out, and we were staring at a fairly difficult quarter. So we had to put on oxygen masks on ourselves first. So we had to save all the internal, protect all the internal stuff that was there. And immediately another task force was how should we adapt and pivot from a market point of view. And the moment we created that structure, we realized the amount of energy we unleashed in the organization on new ideas and new things that started to come out. And eventually, we've now created that into a completely separate track of work, which is kind of moved out. While almost on a regular basis, we've also made sure that the well-being is kind of taken care of. So I think it can very much go hand in hand. I mean, if it's a question of resources, then making sure there's enough bandwidth, both financially, mentally, for leaders to spend on both is very critical. And we did it that way, where I personally spent a lot of time more on internal stuff and well-being, and some of the other members of the leadership spent more time on innovation and what we should do to pivot. But I think, again, having the leadership bandwidth that we created during all these years probably contributed to that. If we didn't have that, then balancing that would have been very, very difficult.
Right.
And probably we would have been stuck with doing one or the other.
And you talked about this leadership bandwidth. You talked about communication, right? Now, communication is critical in all of these kinds of situations, and particularly given that you want to build an organization that lasts. But communication, the persons listening to it, right, need to believe what you are saying, and you need to be transparent. So I will move to Raghu and then come back to you on this issue. Trust
Absolutely.
and transparency are critical. Now, where does one draw the line? I mean, how much to share, how much to trust, right? That seems to be a schizophrenic situation for leadership. Saying if I give too much information, people won't understand, they will misunderstand, they will do all kinds of things. If I trust too much, good God, I don't know what will happen. Things may backfire and the organization will suffer. Raghu, your exposition on this.
See, there are, I think the key word that you touched on, Sanjay, is trust. Na? Yeah, Francis Fukuyama has actually written a whole book on trust.
Yeah.
Right. And he talks about the price that is paid when there is no trust and when things get contractual, and the ease of doing business when there is trust. Right. Now, there are two parts to trust. Na? Trust doesn't mean I have to share everything with everybody. Trust means that if I'm in a leadership position, you trust me to share what I need to understand. You share with me everything that will impact me. And everybody understands that in an organization, you can't just share everything. So I think trust is the bottom line. Once there is trust, there is also the space given to leaders to make these choices of when to share what and what in their view would be anxiety provoking, non-anxiety provoking. And this is the second part, which is, while the bottleneck is in the top and all that we say, Shiva's Nilakantha is also at the top, no?
Yeah.
So one of the critical things for any leader to do at any point of time, and more so in crisis, is to know how to handle anxiety.
How to handle anxiety.
Anxiety. See,
Right.
when you're working in a team, and when I'm doing work with teams, I've done a lot of work with turnarounds.
Right.
It's always that when the leader loses his nerve and does not know how to handle the anxiety of a risk or whatever, it shows through, and the rest of the organization, which is actually doing the work, which actually has to bring out the creativity because they're at the work end, let's say. If they become anxious, they cannot bring in their best, they cannot bring in their creativity. And actually, most of the time in most teams, it's not that the people in the team don't know what to do.
Right.
The people in the team are afraid to take the consequences of a mistake. They're afraid to take the consequences of a loss. They're afraid to take the consequences of the risk. When this is managed and this feeling tone is held by the leader, tremendous creativity comes out. Right? This is not well understood by most people. Na?
Right.
So this coherence in people doesn't come through gimmicks or whatever. It comes through knowing, one, that I'm trusted and I can trust the leader. And second, that when things go wrong and the poison in the system will be handled by the leader.
Right. So the leader takes responsibility, right?
Fully.
100%.
For the outcomes and for the people's feelings, both.
Right. And when you say leader, you don't necessarily mean only the CEO. It is leadership
No.
at all levels.
That's why I'm saying team. At team level, at various levels.
Right.
And you'll find most of the time, Sanjay, this is what I found. The designated guy is not the guy who's handling this. There is some other guy in the team who's actually the psychological leader of the team.
Right.
And crisis will throw up this guy.
Right. And everybody
and
looks
everybody
up to
will
this
trust.
individual.
Yeah, everybody will move towards him. They will trust him.
Yeah.
It's a rare situation where the task leader and the psychological leader are the same person.
Correct. And so, Krishna, what do you think?
So I think, Sanjay, on the transparency thing, I mean, to Raghu, the way at least we've approached it is that you need to be able to share information to the right people in the right way and be open about it. And sometimes be open for people who can come and ask you, why you've not shared this with me? And we are able to explain to them, why. And if we figure out why they need it, then help them out on, how they would want to, look at it. But being open about it and just having a conversation space is, I think, important. Trust is it's a question, that I ask myself almost every month. And it's been almost 10 years I've been asking that question of, should I continue to trust people every month? And I think for me, every time the answer has been, yes, because at least I have taken the approach of start with trust and assuming full trust and only change it if things go, the other way.
So when you say change it, you mean, Krishna, change it vis-a-vis the individual?
Or anything that may happen, if the mistress starts on the other side or some, you figure out there's something going wrong, and after, making sure you validate it, because in that approach, at least 90% of the time, or more than that, the trust has been kind of reciprocated equally or more,
So it's a very interesting and important point, Krishna. Let me just a quick interjection. You assume, if I hear you right, you assume the other person is 100% trustworthy, operate on that basis, rather than assume the person is a cheat and therefore create an environment that forces that person to behave unnaturally.
Absolutely. And I've had more than 90% success. So if I'm getting in any task more than 90% success, I think I should just continue to.
Yeah. Raghu wants to add something. Yes, Raghu?
Yeah. Krishna is, I think, being a little nice about it. What I've seen leaders do is two things, Krishna. One, when they're interviewing people, I've seen that leaders have a very astute way of first judging whether this person is trustworthy or not. Right? And leaders who don't have this ability have a problem.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that judgment call,
Right. That's very critical, because you are saying that you become a member of my group under certain conditions.
Of course.
Most good leaders place trust as the first condition.
Right.
Then everything else can be built on it. Now, if you're not competent enough, I can build competence. I can offer you help and competence. If you're not competent, I can make you part of a team that has the competence. But if I don't have trust in you, how do I give you my resources?
Oh, absolutely.
Right?
100%.
How do I believe that you'll come back to me when there's an issue?
Correct.
Right?
So,
I've seen leaders being very, very astute on this.
Yeah.
no, absolutely, Raghu. I mean, just to clarify my point, what I meant,
Yeah.
I mean,
After that, 90% will work. 90% is damn good, Krishna, which
Yeah.
means you've known how to hire the guy first.
Yeah.
yeah.
Absolutely.
No, Raghu, that's kind of what I meant. So just to clarify, what I meant is that you have that sense of smell,
Correct.
you should be able to smell out, those things, and that's an instinct that you develop, and you
Correct.
have an instinct. But you don't, I mean, once you trust your instinct on it and you go with that, rather than you
Correct.
say, show me proof,
Yeah.
type
Yeah,
of thing.
there's
That's
no
what
proof.
I
Yeah.
In
That's
fact, you talked about trust and integrity and all of that are very tightly coupled ideas. And, about 35 years when I started off my career, about 35 years back at Wipro, that was one single line message I took away from Azim Premji. At no cost, and I mean this very, very clearly, will integrity be ever compromised.
Correct.
And his line was very simple. If you do not know which is black or white, okay, err on the side of white. What you believe is white.
Yeah.
Right? I remember that, when I was tasked with selling computers in, a northern state of India, which is known for its, let's say, less savory practices and governance and all of that. I said, how can I sell computers back in the 1980s? So I was told, what percent of your customers do you believe are honest? I said, maybe 10%. Then the answer I got back is, let's get business from that 10%. So there was no penalization. So the organization system was such, right? So there was no saying, no, you have to get this at any cost. They understood.
Correct.
Right? And then the point I think both Raghu and Krishna made about empathy, right? That they understand the situation and the pressures and, the contextual environment, and then design everything else around it. The
Correct.
freedom, the air cover, everything.
Correct.
So that was a wonderful experience. And I think, you guys have hit the nail on the head. I mean, Raghu and Krishna, it's just fantastic. And, typically what happens is, we always hear about the good examples, Infosys, TCS, this, that, What about the bad examples? Meaning companies that followed trust, transparency, empathy, but somehow didn't succeed as a business, right? What would you say to those guys?
Well, I think,
Yeah.
I think for me, we've kind of looked at this as a combination of head, heart, and the hand. In some
Head,
sense.
heart, and the hand.
Yeah, right.
That's
So
the H.
you may be really good at the empathy part and all these softer aspects, doing really well, but you missed a completely important market trend. And in our case, for example, when the CSR law came, we were a little bit napping. We were 1 year late in entering the CSR, kind of the law, but we kind of, quickly realized and pivoted. But if we had not kind of done that, we probably, with all the good things of what we are talking about, we would not have, kind of done that. And the hand part, which is you need to, at the end of the day, execute and with that rigor. You're not getting paid for being a nice guy in the market. So you're paid for, kind of delivering value. So end of the day, realizing that via delivery and rigor, I think is critical. So, I mean, I would find hard to, look at examples of companies which have these three in the right mix and still failed.
Right.
Maybe they missed the other two if they had one of it. But
So-
if you have
so
these
when-
three in the long run, I think you're going to potentially win.
Raghu?
The whole reason, Sanjay, why I've been talking about the Pancha Pandavas and the model of the 5 critical powers, is
Yeah.
because of this. I agree completely with Krishna. I'm adding 2 more. Yeah.
To make it
to
fun.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, the five are important because the ability to also create certainty, to create scalability is another very important thing. Otherwise, uh, organizations succeed as small organizations, but they don't know how to scale up.
Right, right.
Yeah, you need that ability.
What works in
And
a small company, how do you make it work at scale?
at scale, this is important. Now, the first steps are usually taken, like Krishna is saying, with this insane idea that I'm going to make this work. Now, once it starts working, to also have this ability to step in and say, what is it that is making it work?
Right,
And how do I take this particular thing and make it scalable is a very critical ability.
correct.
This is not always present in most
Right,
organizations,
right,
right? And the other thing, this continuous balancing between the outside and the inside.
right,
That's another critical capability, right? And I think all five are necessary if an organization has to succeed, right?
correct.
And I've seen organizations which are successful, which goof off on one of these,
Right.
and then the slide starts.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And
When they, for example, attribute the wrong reason for their success. And I've seen organizations do this. They succeed and then they interpret the reason wrongly.
right,
Right. And I've had this desperate situation of telling them, hey, man, you guys have got it wrong. No, this is not why you succeeded. This is why you succeeded.
right,
Yeah. And sometimes some breakthroughs happen because there's an external context that enables a quick profit or something like that. And then they think that is the success model.
correct.
So this is a very critical ability.
So what this means, therefore, is an organization like Krishna, you talked about the CSR law and then, how you were able to adapt. And then Raghu talked about internal and external. It tells me that awareness, self-awareness of the organization and the people in it is critical, because only then you begin to see what is happening outside, what you have inside, and trying to find that equilibrium position, right?
Yeah.
And second part relates to this whole issue of being nimble. And you talked about scaling. Scaling does not mean creating a bureaucratic system. It means doing things at a significantly larger scope, right? But being nimble. And therefore, the kind of organizations that will work and leaderships that will be able to deliver this, right? It's clearly not a strict hierarchy, right? It's got to be perhaps a more network, collaborative kind of a setup.
Yeah.
Raghu, what do you think?
Yeah, absolutely, Sanjay. See, I think these hierarchies can last only if the outside is very constant. Yeah? When there's no change in the outside, when there's no change in technology, you can have a hierarchical organization because you need only one or two people to think.
Right.
You don't need too many people who can do the thinking.
Right.
But when you have a very volatile external context, and even the technologies that you have to work with and many other things are changing very fast, which means the knowledge content and the skill content even to deal with the outside is changing very fast.
Correct.
There are many minds that have to come together.
Right.
Yeah. And unfortunately, organization design is stuck. There's a book written, I forget the author. He's put the date as 1906. I don't know how he arrived at this date.
Okay.
When he said that the ability of a single human being to hold the complexity of an organization or hold the complexity of the world around him
right.
was exceeded.
Okay.
So he says from 1906 or whatever date, you need multiple minds with multiple facets of understanding
right.
to put things together to get a picture of the whole.
Right.
Right?
Right.
Today, we are very far away from 1906, right?
Right. Right.
So the degree of complexity is very high. So many people with many minds have to come together. And that's why trust becomes important.
Correct.
Now, I don't know how many people have read this book by Hermann Hesse called The Glass Bead Game.
Yeah.
Yeah, really, I mean, most organizations have to play the glass bead game today.
Yeah.
So I don't know your language at all. You don't know my language, but we have to find the way of telling each other what the reality is outside that's going to impact our organization.
And create that coherence that you talked about.
Coherence,
One
exactly.
point, Sanjay, I want to kind of mention on the self-awareness is that I have found it very hard to practice it all inside the organization. You know, it's really possible. You know, I think you can, no matter how self-aware you are, you're only getting 60% of it, you know, at best.
Right.
So you need people outside, you know, to kind of guide you on that. One, obviously, you know, your board and your mentors, your advisors, you know, and you know, I know you, Rajiv, are all here. It's that part of our journey has been very important. But in addition to that, we've also been very lucky to have our customers call us out, you know, on some of these things. Our friends, our partners kind of call us out, evangelists in the ecosystem. That again links back to the purpose, because they believe we are committed to solve the larger problem of the world and not just us as a company. And they believe Sattva winning is good for them or, you know, the other people in their ecosystem. So they have called back and said, hey, probably you're missing this. And there have been so many instances where customers have come back and told us things that we were not aware of, you know, and for me, that contributes so much to self-awareness that, you know, and if you're listening to your customers, you know, in that same humble way, to your advisors, to your partners, to your employees, then I think the awareness continues to grow. And then everybody is now contributing to, you know, the organizational, you know, in some sense success. But that self-awareness bit is super critical, and it has to be in partnership with externalities as well. So self-awareness is not self, you know, is the point I want to bring up.
Self as in the organization within which one exists, and also being cognizant of the external environment, right? That is how you recalibrate your internal balance between the outside world and inside, right? And that's an important thing.
Krishna is actually talking about a fairly advanced mindset. That's what I was referring to.
Right.
Hierarchies are closed systems.
Right.
They don't include the kind of people you're talking about as part of the us.
Yeah.
Right.
You're talking about a mindset that is, you know, that can look at a network and even an ecology. What you described just now, Krishna, is actually an ecology.
Right.
It says that my customers, many people outside, all of whom are interested in me and my growth and my purpose and our purpose, are part of the us.
Right.
Okay? That requires a certain enlightenment.
So when you reach that kind of, let's say, a empathetic awareness of you and your surroundings, and like we mentioned, the ecology within which you operate, that I suppose would lead to the other dimension of all of this, which is sustainability, right? Because unless the ecology supports you and you support the ecology, you know, there is no balance.
There's no balance.
And there are enough scientific studies that show that, you know, even in the world of animals of which we are part of, you know, there is a particular balance between the predator and the prey. Correct. That is maintained in nature to ensure the optimum number of species and the optimum numbers of each species.
Correct.
Right. And that's a very important, interesting study. But that has been the way people have operated, you know, but we've kind of changed and modified a lot of it over the years. Now, in all of these things, how important is courage? Meaning, I have to take hard decisions. It's one thing to say, okay, well, let's all be empathetic and, you know, let's kind of communicate and be transparent and have trust and all of it. But what is the kind of courage it takes for the leadership? And when I say leadership, I mean it broadly across the organization. You know, I have to take tough decisions. I have to tell an employee that, hey, you know what, this is not cutting it. You know, you probably are better off somewhere else. And when you have to tell a customer that things aren't working right, and that, you know, this is not probably the right customer for you to work with, and so on, in multiple situations. How does one bring oneself up to be able to handle or to deliver these kinds of messages within the organization and outside? Raghu?
This is, you know, this is why, Sanjay, I've been continuously in all my work with leaders, I've been using a very simple frame. I'm talking about will and skill.
Will and skill.
Skill.
Excellent.
Yeah, and I'm saying will on one side, skill on the other.
Right.
Right. Now, for leadership, you have to have a convergence of will and skill for the best
Right.
leadership.
With
Now,
the top right
when-
quadrant.
right? And I think will is more important than skill,
Right.
right? And courage is something that can be nurtured. Yeah, in my understanding over all these years that I have worked, right? If it is there in a person, it can be nurtured.
Right.
If it is not there, yeah, forget it. You can't get it from the outside. And
It's an internal
unfortunately, people read the word courage wrongly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah? All the things that you said, Sanjay, empathy, to really trust that, I sense this person properly requires courage. So courage
Right.
is not just going out there and like a Bhima, smashing something. That's not courage.
Mm-hmm.
That is strength and,
Might.
it's a balam. It's balam. In Sanskrit, it's called balam. It's not Shakti.
Right.
Right? Knowing when to trust, knowing when to hold,
Mm-hmm.
making these judgments, when not to fight, tremendous courage.
Right.
When to fight. So courage has to be understood differently. The problem is the word courage is understood as Rambo.
Ah.
Courage is not Rambo.
Right.
Right? Will is like Gandhi. Will is like Nelson Mandela.
Right.
Yeah, it's a very different quality, and that I think is central. Yeah.
Yeah.
And if you have the will, you'll show it in the right time, in the right place.
Right.
If I have to fight, I will fight. So it'll be like seen as courage in the normal thing, right? Not
Right.
fighting. Yeah, if you go into the Mahabharata, there's a whole section where Draupadi and Bhima keep pushing Yudhishthira, saying, why don't you fight? You don't have courage. And they use pretty crude language to say this. He says, no, I have something else. I have dhirata.
Mm-hmm.
And there is gambira. You have to know when to fight. You have to know when to hold. And there's tremendous courage in that.
Got it. So the Gandhi example was very apt. I think people can relate to that. That how do you, with your sheer will, go out there and take on the mightiest empire of that
Correct.
time, right?
Yeah.
And mobilizing tens of millions of people with literally nothing at your disposal.
Except
and,
truth and trust.
yeah, and then therefore, yeah, and people trusted him, right?
Trusted
people
him.
Trusted. I mean,
Absolutely.
blindly, whatever he said, people just
Correct.
trusted him. And he was entirely transparent about his whole life.
Absolutely.
So the walk the talk piece, and he literally walked,
Yeah.
would really be another great example, right? Krishna,
Yeah.
what do you have to say to that? Courage?
Yeah, I think I mean, I very much, I really like the way, kind of Raghu put it just now, and I think it gave me courage, in some sense to, come out and talk about it, because the courage being nurtured is something that I have personally lived through, and I know in my own journey, I think I evolved, I would say in 2014-15 from a very passionate entrepreneur, to being a more pragmatic CEO, and kind of go to that next level of growth. And I think that required a lot of internal, in some sense, I would now say courage, to Raghu's point. And I think that nurturing, is possible. And I've seen many people around me, a lot of my co-founders, part of my leadership team, the courage being nurtured, getting more confident, to do the thing. But I think the more important piece of courage is the ability to sometimes stay still and kind of act at the right time, and having that ability to judge that for yourself, and even sometimes going with the repercussions of that weight, in some sense, because it may not always work out. There have been, for example, customers that we know, haven't been very, very, let's say, quote unquote, profitable, but are giving us, on the other side, impact, more on the ground, which kind of aligns more with your purpose. So this discussion of should we work with them, we work with them because we are, in some sense, bleeding money, running this account, but we're doing a lot of good work, which is, serving the larger purpose. So what do you do, So in many times, the answers have been very tough, and sometimes staying there, I would say on behalf of the team and a lot of people in the organization, it's probably a demonstration of courage, but we need to obviously draw the line between, courage and stupidity at some point and measure those in a more practical way. But I think going out and taking those tough decisions, in the right way, and this is something, Sanjay, I learned from you about the key to decision making is to take a decision, and rather than kind of procrastinate and push it, and then if it's a wrong decision, take another decision to correct it, in some sense, right? So I think that both that ability to take a decision or taking a decision to not act, which are both decisions which are important decisions, I think requires courage, and I fully relate to that point of Raghu.
Right. Because one of the things that happens in today's instant gratification world and with this social media fueled pressure and everything else is the need to react to every single bit and need to react at that moment, at that instant. Right. Now, to be a leader, how important is it to react versus how important is it to respond? Meaning, a considered decision or a action that is taken, keeping in mind, not just the immediate circumstances, but the larger context of the organization. Because there are many decisions that you don't know what is going to happen as a fallout of that decision, right?
Yeah.
So how does one deal with that?
Again, I think I'm happy to go first, Sajid. There, I think I have taken again the approach of respond, primarily because that's given a little more, time to reflect and look at the larger opportunity, challenge in whatever way, and then take a decision. And you've also, in many ways, are able to consult, as well, because as a leader, you need to take, people along, and at the end of the day, it's your decision, but you also get time to hear out, what other people think. And I think hence a responding approach, has been for us work much better, and for myself. And one immediate example that happened in, I would say in April was, given the whole COVID situation, a lot of the people in the ecosystem, especially people who were in our business or our similar kind of business, started saying that, hey, I will raise money to support COVID efforts and I'll take a percentage of that, and that was and suddenly, we were being flooded, and our team also started saying, hey, should we be doing that? We know we don't have money in the coffers. This is a good way to, in some sense, make money, and the market is doing it. So our response could have been saying, yes, let's go do it, because we were moving money. But by thinking about it from a long-term point of view, consulting, discussing, we said, no, but that's kind of not the way, we probably want to flip, at this point. We would probably look to play to our strengths. I think even that moment of thinking helped us to make the right decisions. Even that small fraction of a second, I think, helps if we get that time.
So in those moments, Krishna, do you vet the decision against the core principles or the purpose?
Of the purpose.
And then
Absolutely.
say, should I be doing this? Right?
Absolutely. I think that's a must.
And therefore, having that purpose in the first place is critical.
Absolutely. And it has to be, and sometimes it's like, one of the things I have believed is there's always this question of impact versus profit, or business versus society, kind of a thing. And my learning is there's no immediate answer, and be a social entrepreneur if you can deal with that ambiguity that you don't know whether it's right or wrong. If you're going to judge everything by right or wrong, then I think you should not be a social entrepreneur.
That's right.
You should be able to live with that ambiguity that it's not clear, but I'm following my instinct, at this point.
Right. But as long as it is aligned with your purpose.
Purpose and what we believe is right.
Raghu?
Now, I have some things to add, Krishna. What I experience in leaders, and even when you're talking, kind of my mind is going there because I'm sensing something of that, but I hear you speaking a different language. Okay, so let me see. I'm going to go on a limb right now. I've seen two things in great leaders. One is the ability to absorb many shocks without getting afraid. Yeah. They're able to see the fearful without getting afraid. Right now, to me, reactivity is when you see something that is fearful, you get afraid. When you do that, you've lost it. You understand what I'm saying,
Absolutely.
right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So you see this, you know that it is dangerous, whatever, but you're not afraid. So what that does is it gives you a space. Now, this space you can get only if you already have a very strong core that you can stand upon, right?
Yep.
So yeah, and I've seen you guys, and you have it, right? You have this ability to stand on your core. That core is what you people call as purpose, this, that, and the other. I call it identity. There's something about Krishna, right? There is something about some of your other people. You are these kind of people. You're good people fundamentally, right? And this, if core, if you don't have, right, your decisions cannot be like weighing it now, yeah. This sense of this point to balance upon is very, very critical. If you have this balancing point, you can weigh this. If you have this balancing point, you can deal with ambiguity, right? What I've also seen with these kind of leaders is when they give this space to themselves, they get insights, okay? And it's very sad that business insight is not seen as a creative process or what, I don't know. It's seen as some decision making. I've actually known leaders who in very difficult situations hold their the space, and after a day or two or three of really staying with it, they come up with an insight. And if you ask them, they cannot tell you why that decision was taken or why that decision is right, but there's some other space they create, some other intelligence they tap into, right? And I think I've seen this consistently in great leaders. And by the way, many of them eat proper food, they exercise, they take care of their bodies, whatever. It's a whole package, right? It's not this crazy living kind of a thing. There's some discipline and respect that they have for everything around. They have a core, which is their identity of a certain kind. And they're able to create the space where some other insight comes through, right? I've seen this over and over again. And this is the kind of thing that helps you go past that bump.
Right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And therefore, now, I'll come to Raghu and then Krishna. In all of this, as you said, there are a certain category of leaders or certain types of people who have this core set of values, attributes within them that allows them to build on it. Like the example of having courage that you talked of. If you don't have that set of attributes, it's impossible for you to learn to be courageous. So, therefore, how does one translate this in an organizational context? I'm a leader and I have a set of attributes. Let's say, I am courageous, and therefore in the rest of my team, how do I translate those sets of values or attributes or behavioral capabilities that I and let's say a few members of my leadership team have? What needs to happen? What kind of a organization, culture, or environment enables that?
Yeah. So I think 2 points. Sorry, Raghu, go ahead, please.
No, go ahead, Krishna.
So two points on that, Sanjay. One is some fundamentals. The way we've been able to do it is to put out almost like a sattva way of work, and you translate that into a set of things that we talk about, and also see how that can be actually walking the talk on the ground, type of stuff. So there's some mechanism of writing it up, institutionalizing it, talking about it, agreeing on it, and kind of making sure it goes in all the parts. But I think the larger learning that I have had, and I'm kind of excited by it, is the fact that these attributes are ever growing and organic. So Sattva's culture with the person X, when a person X joins, becomes an evolved culture, because that person brings a new attribute into the culture itself, and it's kind of a growing organism or a, evolving, part of it. It's not like it's a culture is set and now everybody we have to translate it to and put it in, and it's like a chip in everybody's head type of stuff. We say this is what it is, but it evolves as long as it's, has that core fundamentals. It's something that can continue to evolve. And we've learned that a lot of new people have brought in newer attributes that others in the founding team have picked up and said, hey, this is interesting and we should kind of imbibe this attribute. So it's almost a continuous process of evolving, adding new attributes, bringing new people who are aligned to the larger mission and growing that, kind of culture. So the set of attributes continue to grow. And I think you need an engine which kind of takes that and make sure it's distributed and embedded in the day-to-day working of the organization.
But I would imagine, Krishna, that while newer attributes are getting added into the cultural mix of the organization, I would imagine that there are a set of inviolable attributes, right, which do not change.
Absolutely.
Which I think Raghu also referred to as the core of not just the individual, but in the aggregate, the organization as well. And that in its own turn defines what the organization is.
Absolutely.
Right? Raghu, what your thoughts?
I'm gonna challenge you a little bit, Krishna.
Please.
I think you're stuck with the wrong language. And I think
wrong
language.
Language.
Sanjay, your question is also attribute is a wrong language.
Wrong language. Okay.
I'm going to go back to Sanskrit. Okay. See, if it's not in the seed, you cannot graft it.
Okay.
You cannot bring in an attribute and make it work in an organization that's been there for a long period of time. So the seeds of that particular culture, which is what is called dharma.
Right.
If your if the seed, an acorn can only become an oak tree. Right? That's true of human beings. That's true of organizations.
Right.
Right? So these are not attributes. Attributes don't evolve. It's a form. You cannot create an outside form without power. Yeah, inside. The inside, if it's got that seed, if it's got that quality that is inherent, maybe you haven't grown it so far. There hasn't been a challenge. So this part of what you had inherently,
right,
in your dharmic core, has not grown. Right. I've seen organizations that have tried to graft on from outside. The price they pay is very high. Yeah, I actually worked with an organization which had a tremendous core, right? And unfortunately, they went to a couple of foreign consultants. They came in and said a few things, and then some of us were called back to work with them. Now, what we found was the intelligence of many of these managers in keeping the whole system going was being used to appear as if they're doing something that was told from the outside. Actually, they were not doing that. They were actually wasting time trying to do this, other, the icing on the cake. The cake, right. The core, the energy and the power cannot be grafted.
So cosmetic surgery does not help.
Does not help. The word attribute is a wrong word.
Wrong word.
If the person and the organization does not have this core, this dharmic core, right, it cannot develop responses suddenly.
So can we sort of say the core is a function of, let's say, DNA plus?
Yeah, DNA.
It is.
If you want to use a modern word, that's the DNA, because that's the only thing that can give you a
organization's
response.
DNA.
Yeah.
Right. Krishna, you want to respond, or is that?
No, I think absolutely.
That reminds me also. I think Raghu, you talked about Peter Drucker. Yeah, he's got a very famous article he wrote many years ago called "The Theory of the Corporation."
Yes.
Where the theory of a corporation is that there is a certain way, a certain DNA of the corporation. It
Correct.
Doesn't matter what you do, doesn't matter what new people
Correct.
come. There is a way in which it will work.
Correct.
Right? And we have seen this in India, right? And there's so many companies which have a particular style of working.
Correct.
And even in the same industry, multiple companies behave differently. It doesn't matter who the leadership is, right? The style, the culture, the processes, and all the rest of it, the way they treat people, treat vendors, all of that.
Yeah.
And that's a resounding thing. Amazing.
And if they try to graft on a leader who doesn't intrinsically have this ability to respond to these
That's
things,
right.
he gets bumped off.
Correct.
And if he uses power to prove his point, he screws the organization.
Right.
Yeah.
And,
Absolutely.
And it's not a good or bad, right or wrong. It is just the way it is.
That's the way it is. Yeah.
Right. So one has to accept that. And unless and if to change it, one has to uproot everything, go through enormous pain, and rebuild everything.
Yeah, it's not possible. Yeah, not possible. Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah,
one more question. A lot of these, of course, have been variations of questions that the audience has asked. One question which is from the audience member is, people talk about working with human values and things of that kind, and empathetic leadership, and non-negotiable values of a leader. So there is this human values, then there are certain non-negotiable values, empathetic leadership, all of that. How would you look at a leader, Raghu, in your experience, and say, you know what, for this kind of for a company, this set of, let's say, values are non-negotiable. Only then will there be a fit. How does one think about it?
See, I have after having watched and been part of this thing early, in my career, this thing of values, vision, mission, and all that was a big thing. Yeah.
That used to be a big thing back in the day.
With a few organizations, it's the same set of things that are put in different words.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I haven't seen anything new at all.
Thanks to all management books.
So the word values, I'm a little, wary of. Okay. So I'm saying that I've come to the conclusion now that there are 7 basic qualities, human qualities that are essential, which you call values. You can call it whatever name you want, right? First is trust.
Trust.
Second is dynamicity in action.
Dynamicity in action, okay.
Third is what we've been talking about over and over again. An understanding of who I am, what is the world I'm in, what is the interrelationship, which I'm calling dharma.
Dharma.
Right? Me, my world, and the world I'm in, not the whole thing. Do I consider all of them? Right? Then I'm talking about a great deal of importance given to knowledge.
Right.
Which is jnana. Right? You have to know, like what Krishna was saying before.
Right.
Then there is a quality which I'm calling, which is ramyam. That is delight. I mean, I must have fun here. I mean, whatever crap is happening, COVID, no COVID, you and I are having a damn tough time making a decision. At the end of it, we have to laugh and have fun.
Is the joy that comes from within.
The joy and the delight of it, right? Then I'm talking about 2 other things that are kind of internal. Now, one is developing the core, right? That's what I'm calling yoga. Constantly working with oneself so the core becomes really, really powerful.
Right.
And the ability to constantly practice what you stand for.
Right.
In different words, everybody is talking about these 7 things here.
Right.
Yeah. The critical thing I find between leadership and its people is, do the people in the organization feel valued by the leader? If I'm sitting here and I'm talking to you, do I have the sense that you value me as a human being?
Right.
Now, if you value me as a human being, I'm willing to bring in my best to you.
Right.
But if you as a leader are saying, I don't really value you, here are my resources, please value my resources.
Right.
Chances are it's not going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, the key is the valuing process between the leader and the people around.
Right.
And all of us together, what are the core things that we like to keep alive? right? I haven't yet met a single person working in an organization who doesn't have two needs. One, he wants the organization he is in to win.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't care whether it's, CSK or BSK. Yeah. If I'm like that team, I want that goddamn team to win.
Yeah.
Second, I want that team to win in an honorable way. Now, if I find out that they've done some Gucci and they have won, it doesn't make me feel good.
Right.
It's the same with any person in an organization. Yeah, I like my organization to win, and I like my organization to do something that I feel honorable about.
Right.
Right. And
Right.
this, you can call it by different names. Yeah.
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 If these two are there and I feel valued, things will happen.
Right. Right. Krishna?
Sir, I think for us, the fit starts from the alignment with the core, and for me, it's always helped to ask the question of why do you want to do this?
Why
A
do you
lot
want
of
to?
people have, why do you want to do what we
Why
do?
do you want to do? Okay.
And a lot of people have answered by saying, let's say social impact is very exciting sector or innovative sector. I said,
That's
okay,
very
if you
trendy.
take out excitement and innovation, will you still do it? Will you
Yeah.
still solve for poverty, right? Because if that's the alignment, then probably, that may change. It may, I don't know. First of all, I don't know what's so exciting about poverty, but let's say it's exciting. Then why would you want to kind of do it even if it's not there? So at what core level are you aligned? Do you have that sense of this is something that I want to do because of these reasons, and does that kind of in some sense align with our core? For me, that's the kind of leader to hire when there's that shared core or shared vision. When going back to my earlier point, then the person can add something new to the culture, because at a very fundamental level, if the misalignment is there, the organization will either throw him out or he will create problems for the organization. But if that alignment is there, he can bring something new, even at a very fundamental level, and trigger a part of the DNA that was probably not triggered before, if that alignment is there.
So and the misalignment leads to stress.
To lead to stress. So I think for me that alignment to hire a leader or to bring in a leader, that alignment at the core is very, very critical, and has the ability to execute. At the end of the day, we also are in a bit of an agility space. So execution speed, some of those other things also become the secondary alignment that you will look for. But definitely the core alignment is critical.
Got it. And so so coming to the issue about this, I mean, final set of remarks. The business about, therefore, being self-aware, so Two is being aware of what is around you, about you. These are the most fundamental, and trying to find a balance that meets with your core objectives of trust, of transparency, of empathy, of ecology, and all of that. And so to go through this process of self-discovery and to come to a stage where you really understand what all these things mean, what would you say a CEO like you needs to do?
I think most important thing, Sanjay, is to listen. And
is what?
To listen.
Listen.
Have the ability to listen.
Perfect.
Because I think it's critical to listen to your own self sometimes, and listen to your advisors, people close to you, the market, all of those things. That important element is key. If that is there and you're able to absorb, and then in some sense translate it to the right action message, keep it simple, then I think that's very, very critical. But if I had to put on one thing, it would be the ability
to listen. I mean, like the old saying, right? You have 2 ears and a mouth, use them in that proportion. Well,
yeah.
Jago, what would you say?
Absolutely. You know what? Long time ago, it just reminds me, one of the most beautiful moments I had was when my teacher, Deshikachar, interviewed me actually. He said, what are you doing in an organization? What is this? How are you using your yoga? And all that. Because I'd studied with him for 12 years and all. No? So I said, there's only one thing I'm doing. I'm just listening. I'm just listening very, very carefully. So he wrote this little article saying a good listener. Okay. That's one of my most treasured, one of my most treasured pieces, right? Every time I go into an organization, when I'm doing 5-day programs, 6-day, whatever I'm doing, I'm telling them I'm finally teaching you only one thing. I'm only teaching you how to listen.
Right.
right? And to me, that's the core of yoga. Then in yoga, there's one line which says dhyana heyaha tadvrittayaha. That is the core line. Now, that really means that I'm listening with attention.
Right.
And to listen with attention requires all the other things we talked about. Now, I have to have a core. So when I'm listening to something that is something I don't like, I immediately don't pass judgments.
Right.
If I'm listening to something that is dangerous, I don't immediately get scared, and so on. If I
Right.
listen to something that I like, I don't just jump on it.
Right.
Right. So this ability to have the core, to be in dhyana in a sense, is the only attribute, if you ask me, and that requires courage, that requires a core. If I don't have a solid, good sense of values as a human being, I will never develop this ability to listen, because I'm always, looking for that opportunity. I'm playing games. I'm doing all kinds of weird things out there.
Right.
Right. So I'm absolutely with Krishna. This
Fantastic.
is the one thing, and it takes a lifetime to develop it. That's the only issue.
and hence on that note, we'll say it has to therefore be built to last.
It therefore has to be, I have to build myself to last, and then I can build everything else to last.
Absolutely. And then only if you build to last can you leave behind a legacy.
Yeah.
And that is the most important thing, right?
Anything meaningful. Yeah, absolutely.
Very good. So, that brings us to the end of this wonderful, wonderful session. I really enjoyed this conversation with you, Raghu, and with you, Krishna. Absolutely wonderful, and hope the audience has also enjoyed it. And I want to thank the two of you. I want to thank all the folks who participated as the audience and sent in their questions. And I'm sure that we will put this up on the YouTube channel and social media as a recording. And based upon the interest and further questions, etc., we may consider doing another set at some point in the future. So all that remains for me is to thank all of you very, very deeply and sincerely for your participation, especially to Raghu and to you, Krishna. Thank you all very much. Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the lovely questions, Sanjay.
I
you really pushed us, man. That was great.
Thank you, Raghu.
Yeah.
Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.